I'm going to just note real quick that I am a little bit hopped up on painkillers right now. So
Cool.
Oh,
Sweet.
we'll see how well I'm able to keep this on track.
What do you want?
Tramadol.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Woo.
And this is
Feeling
going to
nice
be
and loose.
real loosey-goosey. Serial killers. Am I right, you guys?
Ooh, yeah. Hello and welcome to Murder Husbands, an episode-by-episode deep dive appreciation of the Bryan Fuller created television series Hannibal, based on characters from the novels by Thomas Harris. We are POPSKL, a group of like-minded creators who enjoy getting together to have big conversations for big stories. I'm Lisa K. Weber, artist and co-creator of the indie sci-fi fantasy comic Hex 11. With me, as always, are my esteemed POPSKL co-hosts. First up, my dear colleague in writing. Ooh, sorry. This thing pops out because my ears are too small.
They're too small.
Oh, tiny
They
ears.
are. Look at how tiny.
Tiny ears.
Lisa K. Weber.
I prefer to think of them as dainty, not small.
Very. Very.
All right. First up, my dear colleague and writing and creative partner on Hex 11, Kelly Sue Milano. Hi, Kelly Sue.
Hi.
Next up, the writer of the noir fantasy webcomic Hunter Black and the upcoming Netflix animated series Sonic Prime, Justin Peniston. Hi,
You
Justin.
make me sound so exciting.
Next, author, space enthusiast, and cross-stitcher to the stars, Claire Thorne.
Cross-stitcher
Hi,
to the
Claire.
stars. Just those are not famous people, they're actual stars. Like I'm cross-stitching my way to whatever is closest to us in the galaxy.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep. Perfect. And lastly, but not leastly, actor, writer, producer, TikTok dancer. It's Philip Kelly.
Here I am.
Philip.
Here I am.
All right. Well, here we all are. So let's dive in to discussion. Oh, before we dive into discussion, Justin and Kelly Sue will take us through a quick recap of Hannibal's first episode, Apéritif. Let's go.
The series opens, of course, with a crime scene. Standing in the middle of the room, Will Graham investigates, using his ability to see the murder through the killer's eyes. As he comes to a grisly conclusion about the nature of the homicide, we see that he is simultaneously sharing his insights with a lecture class at the FBI Academy as a way to show them the murderer's design.
After class, Will is approached by Special Agent Jack Crawford, head of the Behavioral Science Unit, about assisting him in a case of 8 missing college girls, the most recent being Elise Nichols. Upon questioning her parents, Will quickly deduces that she was taken from her home and discovers her corpse arranged neatly, almost apologetically, in her bed. During the autopsy, they discover Elise Nichols had A, been mounted on deer antlers, and B, had liver cancer, their first hint that the killer is a cannibal. She had been returned to her bed because, as Will puts it, the meat was bad.
Will, understandably, begins to have sweaty nightmares. Jack consults Dr. Alana Bloom for an assessment of Will, but she refers him to Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a criminally sexy private psychiatrist. Jack introduces Hannibal to Will, and shortly afterward, a young woman's body is found in a field, literally mounted on antlers. The killer is dubbed the Minnesota Shrike, and Will is convinced this murder is the work of a copycat. The victim is also missing her lungs.
Cut to Hannibal as he knifes, prepares, and eats a set of fucking lungs. Hannibal and Will meet to look over a construction site with a connection to the murder. There they find records of Garrett Jacob Hobbs, a man recently resigned from his job who fits Will's profile. While Will is distracted, Hannibal makes a secret courtesy call to Hobbs to warn him he's about to be caught. As Will and Hannibal arrive at the Hobbs residence, Garrett Jacob Hobbs bursts through the front door, slicing his wife's throat and tossing her on the ground. Will follows him into the house and shoots him dead, just as he's about to offer the same fate to his daughter, Abigail. We close with a peaceful Hannibal and a very fucked up Will at Abigail's hospital bedside.
Oh, thanks,
Welcome.
guys.
Sweaty nightmares.
Yeah.
Sweaty nightmares.
Oh, so sweaty.
Ooh, so sweaty.
Dripping.
And criminally sexy therapy.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Hey,
So
it's
that
Murder
one.
Husbands after all. So,
After all.
Come on.
All of these
so
things are true.
yes. So I just kind of wanted to start off with like a general, like, first episode. Let's dive into these characters that we have all been introduced to. We've got Will Graham, we've got Jack Crawford, we've got Hannibal Lecter, and we've got Alana Bloom as our kind of like four main people we've been introduced to really so far. So what do we think of them and how they fit into like the unique world of this show? Anyone?
Kelly
You know,
Sue has yummy thoughts.
I know.
see them.
Just cooking them up, you know.
Those are my thoughts initially.
Just a little shoulder shimmy.
Yeah. I think we should start with Phil because you've only seen these two episodes.
I've only seen these first two episodes, and
Yeah.
I think the most visceral reaction I had to a character was, I think her name is Beverly Katz, interrupting the crime scene investigation that Will was having. I was like, like, step off. I was like, get out of that room. What do you do? And then she's like, and he interrupted me. I'm like, no. Like, I had a very visceral reaction to her interloping upon the crime scene. I was like, you don't get to tell Will what to do and make him feel like he's the one doing the wrong thing.
That is so great because it's like I mean, it's like, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that it's like her character just becomes so fucking fantastic on this show.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
sure.
it's interesting to like hear like a first time viewer's first reaction to her. Cause I don't remember how I first reacted to her. Cause all I think of her is like, oh, I fucking love Beverly Katz.
Oh my gosh.
I also love
Amazing.
Beverly Katz. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
it. To be fair, although not to undermine your reaction, which is perfectly natural, you know, and probably similar to what I initially had, she is probably not expecting someone to be doing, you know, psychic trauma in her crime scene. You know, it is her crime scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah, indeed, indeed. You know, that was the initial reaction. It calmed down after a few moments, my initial reaction.
Yeah.
But immediately I was like, lady.
I like her sort of I don't give a fuck, you know, sort of you know, quality how she approaches.
Sure.
Well, I like too that it's kind of the first time that we are given a little bit of a hint that what we're being told by Will, or that what we think is the series of events or the order of events through Will's eyes is not going to be reliable, because you kind of walk away from that going, okay, wait, did she interrupt him or did he interrupt her? And who does he even remember the order of events, or was he so lost in everything that he just didn't even notice another person in the room? Like, is he that out of it? And so the question of how together he is, how much he can even reliably narrate to himself what he's done, is immediately established with her.
Totally.
I also, and I just want to put this out there, that I know we're going to jump into obviously talking about the big characters in the show, but I have such a wild appreciation for these secondary characters like Beverly and the other two guys, the medical examiner guys. Yeah,
French Stewart is great.
I'm enough of a procedural.
What the fuck, Phil?
What? Isn't that who is that?
French
It's
Stewart.
not French
Stewart.
Who is it?
Fucking Thompson.
Oh, it's Scott Thompson. That's so funny. Like, I had in my head the minute I saw him, I misplaced faces. That's hilarious. I don't know why I had French Stewart in my mind.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
That is.
Although that would be
phenomenal.
amazing if it had been.
That is phenomenal. What just
That's
happened
funny.
here today.
I don't know why. I don't know why I had French Stewart in my head. The minute I saw him.
So I will
Lisa.
say that you said French Stewart. I did know who you were talking about. You were talking about Scott Thompson.
Well, yeah,
Scott
it's just
Thompson,
like easily mixed up in my head there for some reason.
I immediately knew who he was talking about too. Like, you know, that it's not that difficult a leap to come up with French Stewart instead of Scott Thompson.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, but
So we're not actually calling you completely crazy.
Ellie,
Philip.
Sue, and I are
you're not crazy. You're just funny.
As long time fan of Kids in the Hall, specifically
Yes.
Buddy Cocktail.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
It is slightly blasphemous to me, but I'll allow it.
Absolutely. Anyway,
Yeah.
as I was saying, I am a longtime huge fan of crime procedurals, and especially ones like this that are very serious. Like the whole British crime dramas are my end of the spectrum, right? Like very serious and dry and ghoulish and all of that stuff, but with tea interspersed here and there, which I think Hannibal gives us, but just in a kind of a really macabre way. And then we'll get back to that. But I have been fascinated for years with the choices that these show producers make in the secondary characters, and who, and in particular, there's always the character, the gruesome murder happens, and then we have to pop over to the autopsy. And the medical examiner doing the autopsy, to me, is just always the most fascinating character in these procedurals. And they're always, I think, given a very specific role to play to, like, bounce off of the main character and give us indications about who the main character is going to be, etc. And I didn't really realize how much I was tuning into this until I watched the Perry Mason show on HBO.
Oh, sure.
With Matthew Rhys. And that medical examiner and that all of the interactions he has when he goes to the autopsy room in that show are just absolutely freaking brilliant and awesome. Hilarious. And it just triggered something in me about, like, I really do need to go back and go through all of the shows that I've loved and pull all of these characters together and do a comparison of them, because and the fact that they have a team of them, and I think that Hannibal is very purposefully giving us, obviously, comic relief, right? Like, because we need that, but we also need something that portrays that this investigation unit is a serious unit. It's not just, we're not just going to go have like one guy cutting up bodies. They need a team of people working on this shit, because it's serious stuff that's happening. But that was my. I'm going off on side characters already, and we haven't even talked about.
I know.
I like it.
That's fine. We're all doing side characters.
Support it. Yeah.
I love that. To jump off of that Beverly, my feeling is that Beverly Katz often is like the voice of maybe the audience. Like, she walks into this crime scene and she's like, "Who are you? You're not real FBI. Oh, are you unstable?" I just love that.
And you can't tell if she's maybe a little bit worried, or she's like, "Oh,
interested
unstable person. I'm very keen on knowing you better."
I totally admire that so much, because she's just like, let's just call it what it is. You're in here doing like daydreaming while I'm in here actually doing a job. And I love, and it gives us so much, like, we see so much of Will Graham through these characters, through Jack and Alana and, Zeller, Price, and Katz. And I love that, because on his own, you're sort of like, what is his deal? Like, I remember when I first watched this, I was like, what actually is he? It was so hard for me to delineate when he's dreaming and when he's actually in real life. And I loved that about the character of Will.
Yeah.
And I think that's on purpose.
Oh yeah. Like,
most definitely.
Set up a character saying, "I don't like dealing with people." You need to push people in his face over and over again. Totally. And that's what's happening. And that's wonderful. I mean, I that was my reaction to Beverly, but I do love that. I do love that. I did love that reaction. I was like, I got it. I got that. I understood why it was happening.
So I watched this pilot a bunch of times. When it first aired, I saw the ads on the sides of buses, and I was like, I like Hannibal Lecter. I'm going to DVR this. Yeah. So I set up to DVR, and I sat down to watch it like a day or two later, and I was so like blown away by it. Like, I think I watched it 2 or 3 times that day. Like, I was really, really impressed. And now for the first time, I'm really struck by something. The first time we see Will at the initial crime scene, he's dressed exactly like Sam and Dean Winchester from Supernatural.
God, yeah, he is.
Which he doesn't. I mean, and he's got that sort of plaid denim chic thing going anyway. Do you know what I'm saying? Right. But I was wondering, because Bryan Fuller is a TV dude, like that's his bread and butter. I was wondering, is this intentional? Is this a visual cue that telling the audience that Will Graham hunts monsters.
Ooh.
Whoa.
You know, like that's what I found myself
Whoa.
feeling like in that moment, because it was such a like a real like, maybe it's because I watched a couple episodes of Supernatural recently, so I really was like, oh shit, he's just like Dean, you know. And so I think Bryan Fuller is the kind of guy who would watch Supernatural, you know, because he's into genre shit.
Solid show. Yeah.
So like I really felt that, and I felt like it was a real, especially on a show that relies so much on its own visual language to, you know,
also very husbandy.
Yeah. Yes. Also, you know, for the shippers out there, this is a very, you know, this is laying down roots, shall we say?
Totally. Extreme shipping.
Wow. That is levels deep, y'all.
Yeah. Let's just get in there. Let's just dig it up.
I will say, I also noticed something this time that I hadn't noticed before. And obviously you can't notice it on your first time. And I'm going to say this obliquely so I don't spoil anything for Philip.
Sure.
But I never realized how much of the groundwork of what is to come is laid in this episode.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
You
they
know?
pretty much.
Oh God.
And I'm
Again,
talking about character stuff, not just, you know, the Garrett Jacob Hobbs and how that lingers, but
yeah.
And like, we're going to come back to this later in the season, and I'm going to be like, Phil, this was blah, 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 blah. And it was so perfectly disguised and made to seem like just a part of the story there, you know, like at hand.
We're going to come back to episode 1, some groundwork that was laid in episode 1 at the end of season 2.
Yeah.
That's
Oh yeah.
how-
Post show. Yeah.
All right.
That's how like
I
sure
feel the
they
game
were of what they were doing.
I feel the game being played already. Like I feel the game starting for the long run in the first episode. There's
how many people came to this show that didn't understand or know the character, at least of Hannibal Lecter? I mean, you might not have seen Red Dragon, so you might not have understood Will Graham or had an idea of that character. But this is kind of unique in some ways, in that here's a show that is going to be telling 3 seasons or hopefully more of stories about characters that everybody already understands, and they're also not just that, but they're also telling the stories that have already been told in some cases. I can't imagine approaching that as a writer and having the confidence required to say, okay, I'm going to be able to do this in a way that is unique and fresh and offer something that is interesting. And but they absolutely achieve it.
Oh yeah.
Well, I would say
totally agree.
They clear the bar and then some.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's an argument can be made that going into this show, Hannibal Lecter was maybe the second best known movie villain behind Darth Vader.
Darth Vader.
You know what I mean?
100%.
You know, like everyone knew Hannibal Lecter, and Anthony Hopkins was so iconic. Like, you know, he created this amazing. He got a Best Actor Oscar when he was on screen for like 20 minutes. You know, like it's like
not even 20 minutes. I think I was listening to something today. I don't know if it's accurate, but I think he has 7 minutes of total screen time.
No, I think it's more than that.
Is
it's
it more?
Gotta be more than that.
Yeah.
Well, it might be. I might be including him as being on screen when we're actually just looking at.
We're actually talking.
Clarice Starling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So his actual sum total might be easily that 7 minutes. So, you know, and I read Red Dragon, I read Silence of the Lambs, I read Hannibal, you know, I'd seen all the movies. I haven't seen Manhunter. But all of that stuff, like I felt myself like, you know, I'm a part of the Hannibal verse. I'm a fan. I get this, you know. I kind of approach this with like a real like snooty, you know, attitude. Like, you know, I'm curious, but this better be good.
Justin?
You know?
I'm sorry. Kelly Sue just confirmed that we all think you're really snooty, but that's not exactly.
I want you to know
Not
that
at all.
I put up with this shit from my wife. I don't have to put up with it from you guys. All right?
I just want to go on the record as saying that I wouldn't choose the word snooty.
No.
But how can you
But
be?
you did.
Yes.
Yes.
How can you be the explainer
without
if
being.
you're not
Yes.
like?
It's true. It's true. But
Continue.
all of this is to say, because Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal and his introduction, of course, you started him off cooking and
Gorgeous.
eating,
Yeah,
was
wonderful.
amazing. And really instantly, without a single word of dialogue, started to make the character
Mhm.
his as opposed to Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
But also because I loved Silence of the Lambs is a brilliant film.
Hands down.
And one of my favorite actors in it is Jack Crawford. I love Scott Glenn.
Oh yeah.
That guy is the man. So I felt like Lawrence Fishburne had an uphill climb. But
Mhm.
boy, he seizes that character quickly
Yeah, he
and
does.
takes ownership of it.
Yep.
You sometimes think of Lawrence Fishburne in these bombastic roles, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? But the man's a true actor too, and just
Yeah.
and
mesmerizing in a
Yes.
role where he's so subtle.
and big
Yeah.
ups to Bryan Fuller for realizing how freaking lily white and male Thomas Harris and the various adaptations made these stories.
Oh yeah.
And for making Alana Bloom a woman, for making Freddie Lowndes a woman, for making
Mhm.
Jack Crawford a black man. Like these things, they're important,
Yeah.
and they make it more of the now.
Mhm.
The introductions of Will, Jack, and really the only character whose introduction I didn't love for a character who I come to love is Alana Bloom's.
Yeah.
Because her character's not given a whole lot of individuality or agency yet. She's really just like, I'm here to protect Will, and it's like there's not much more to her in this first episode than that,
Definitely
Wow.
going to be having you read some dialogue of hers
I
every
was gonna
episode.
say, we know who's playing Alana in the audio drama remake of
Exactly.
Hannibal from
You
POPSKL.
said you weren't going to let him get too close.
Unbelievable.
Perfection.
Audio dramas,
So
baby.
amazing. That's a really great Alana Bloom you have there.
Mhm.
I completely agree with everything that you're saying, Justin. I was hesitant for years and years to watch this show because I was like, I don't know. I love Silence of the Lambs. I love Red Dragon. I do love the film version Red Dragon. A lot of people are like, I like it. I thought it was great. And so I was like, I don't know. Am I really going to get into this dude as Hannibal Lecter? I mean, really? But from the get-go, you're like, I'm in.
Mhm.
I didn't even have to think about it. I was just like, there's something fascinating going on with you. And I want to really figure it out.
Yeah.
I rewatched Red Dragon a couple of days ago. And rewatching it was because it'd been so long since I'd watched that or even Silence of the Lambs in relationship to watching this show. And so it was a good refresher in terms of just how much of the show really does connect back to the original story and the characters. And that's fascinating to me. But also my reactions to the portrayal of Hannibal and Will Graham. And again, and I want to emphasize that I am not, I do not want to take anything away from my love for Edward Norton or Anthony Hopkins because they're both really, really great. But it says something about the choices that the show makes and that Mads Mikkelsen makes in particular. Well, not in particular, because also Hugh Dancy, the choices that he's making as well, just take these characters to a different place that is more visceral to me because they feel like more real characters, especially Hannibal. I love Anthony Hopkins, but his Hannibal, especially in Red Dragon, is very sneering and kind of slimy. And whoever made the choice to give him a little rat tail, like a little ponytail thing in that when he's serving dinner and doing stuff, was like, nope, that doesn't work. It's just not quite the right thing anymore. And it was then. And but going to where Mads Mikkelsen has taken this character and making this character feel so human,
vulnerable,
is so much more human
yeah,
than he ever was before. It really changes the way you see everything.
completely.
So,
Well,
I agree.
it's hard not to feel like the TV show format just lends itself better to these characters. You know, these characters are complicated as hell.
Yeah.
You know, and by comparison, and I, again, not to take anything away from those movies, which I enjoyed, from certainly not from, you know, Sir Anthony Hopkins, who is, you know, an icon, you know, a titan. But the film versions, by comparison, are a little bit more of a caricature.
Yeah.
They're a little bit, you know, you're right about, you know, Hannibal's a little bit more sneering, a little bit more mustache twirling, a little bit like, I'm going to eat you too, my pretty, you know, and it's just, you know, it's
all the voices today, Justin.
I know. I love it.
amazing. And I think format really gives these characters life and fullness and depth that, you know, the films couldn't achieve, you know. And I think those things that now seem almost cartoonish by comparison, those are the tools you have to use to tell a full story in, you know, without a lot of real estate to work with, you know.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's important that we come away from the show feeling like we would want to sit in a room, like we would actually want and to seek out the company of Hannibal Lecter in the show. It's, if you didn't have the secret knowledge that the audience has about who this character is, I could absolutely see myself going, yes, I need to spend time. I want him to be my therapist and I need to spend time with him, and getting kind of addicted to that. You can see why the characters are gravitate to him. And I don't feel the same way with the Anthony Hopkins character. And again, I think, like exactly like you're saying, Justin, it's because we don't get to see him in moments where that could be established in those
and
movies.
Also Hannibal's a different character, you know. Hannibal, the exposed and caught, is not the same person. He doesn't have to put on his person suit in the same way that Hannibal, the distinguished psychotherapist, does, you know. So
right, exactly. That's why I love like getting to know him at this time in his life, before he's caught, because we haven't, I mean, other than Hannibal Rising, we never got that story. So I like that this exists where it is, and that we get to see him this way. And agreed that it's like what Claire was saying about how people gravitate to him. I would absolutely accept an invitation to his dinner parties and eat people, like,
oh my God,
without knowing I was eating people. I would absolutely be like, yeah, this is delicious. What's the next course?
I would love that. I instantly was like, I will absolutely be in a room with you, and I know that you'd probably kill me. And I would also be like, let's do it.
Just be rude, you know?
I don't think you're rude enough to get eaten necessarily. I think
exactly.
I think Kelly Sue, you're charming enough to save your own life.
I think so. I think but it would be nice to, you know, it'd be nice to do the dance with Hannibal Lecter. With the Mads Mikkelsen Hannibal Lecter.
Oh my goodness.
See, that's a perfect,
all right,
exactly kind of what Claire was talking about, where it's like, you know, I didn't have that experience watching Hannibal Lecter in the films. You know, it was more of like a, you know, ooh, I want to just dip my toe in to get a peek at this freak of nature kind of experience with the Anthony Hopkins portrayal. But in this one, I'm like, I want to be inside your face.
Yeah.
It's the lips. It's Mads Mikkelsen's lips is really everything. What it comes down to.
It's just the facial structure. And since we're kind of now going into the minutia of how visually appealing Hannibal Lecter is, let's go on to the question about the visualization of this show.
Ooh, I love it.
Because yeah, the visuals on this show are like
Outstanding.
they're
Really?
art.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very elevated. And so I kind of let's go into it, like set dressing, costumes, lighting,
Mhm.
special effects, like how all of this stuff kind of adds to the experience of the show and
Yeah.
adds to like the story and everything.
Can we just center our discussion with the word sensual?
Ooh, yes.
Yes.
Sensual.
Yes, we can.
Actually,
just wanna
that's really
stay
great.
there.
Because the first thing, and I know all of us probably feel this way, is that it taking into account the production value and like the epicness of the way that the show looks and feels. It is not lost on me that this show was on network television
In
almost
prime time.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It-
When we were living totally different lives and we were relating with content in a completely different way. I mean, this was almost pre-streaming.
Mhm.
And for this show to be, you know, we joke all the time about give me that Amazon production quality. This is not far from that to me. And that
Oh,
was
it's
so
gorgeous.
I was so struck by that.
Yeah.
There,
I was amazed every week that the show was on. I was like, I cannot believe this is on network television. I
No.
cannot believe it.
That thought echoed through my brain as I rushed home every Friday night after work to watch my DVR'd copy
Yeah.
with my, girlfriend, boyfriend, Lou, because we were both rushing home from the same bar to,
Amazing.
and as we watched at every commercial break, we'd call each other.
Yeah. It's
But I mean, like I've already sort of hinted at, this show clearly has a visual lexicon,
yes.
beginning with the costuming, and I think sensual is exactly the right word for it,
Yes.
because I mean, I've never said this before in my life, but this is a true statement.
Ooh.
I just wanted to touch Hannibal's jackets. I just wanted to rub my hands on his suits. His suits were so impeccable.
Mm-hmm.
He was so perfectly outfitted at all times, I mean, he was like James Bond if James Bond had his shit together. Do you know what I'm saying in terms of the way he outfits himself and the way he looked in a suit,
Yeah.
which is,
James
especially since
Bond
Nicholson played a
wasn't
Bond
such
villain.
a friggin' crybaby.
Seriously,
Well, and if you place Hannibal, like you were saying, Justin, next to Will Graham, who looks like he's out of Supernatural, right? Like they're making such a point that Will Graham is not part of this like establishment. He's not part of society. He's removed himself. But then you get kind of the flip side of that when they're in this episode, when they go to the construction site, looking for Garrett Jacob Hobbs. Am I getting all of those names correct? I have a hard time with three names. I usually get one wrong. I know. Yeah. And how out of place Hannibal looks in that environment. Like the idea of Hannibal being in the field and doing investigative work seems so wrong. It is not that is not his place to be. And it kind of heightens that sense of just like jangliness we have about his character. It's like, oh no. And then showing up at the Hobbs house later and how he's just standing and watching as things are happening.
Impassively.
And Will impassively. And it mirrors the way they're dressed and the way they're presented to such a T. It's the visual aspects of the show are always telling us how to react and how to feel to things. And the food preparation, I'm a food movie. I'm a whatever the name is for that. I'm a foodie when it comes to movies.
Yes.
I have a whole list of food movies that are my absolute favorite. I love just like food porn. Not like food porn. It is food porn. And I think this show does because they could have gone really over the top and made it really cartoonish, the amount of food preparation scenes. And I I think they keep it right within where it needs to be. We're introduced to Hannibal as he's eating lungs, like he's eating, and the preparation. I mean, he's literally pushing the air out of human lungs, and you're like, "Ooh, that's a beautiful charcuterie board."
Yeah. Well, and the voiceover of the scene is them talking about this girl who had her lungs taken out. Like they're happening simultaneously with these gnarly crime scene goings on.
Right,
but I'm also sitting here being like, that looks good. What?
But watching Hannibal eat it, it's like, oh yeah.
Well, and the actual first time we see him cooking is like right after Jack Crawford has a conversation with Alana Bloom about like, you know, he wants basically someone to talk to Will about his problems, and she is like, well, I know this other guy. And that's the first time we go to Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah.
And it's the lighting of that scene is like, he is sitting at his table. It's all black everywhere. You know, he's sitting at his table, beautiful spread, and he's eating, and the lighting is on him, and his face literally looks like a skull.
Yes.
Like his eyes, the lighting is like, so his eyes are hollowed out and like his cheekbones are really sharp.
Yes.
And he looks like death.
Visually, that moment, Lisa, my literal thought as I was looking at that visual reminded me so much of those close-ups that were straight on with similar lighting, similar color palette as the Gary Oldman Dracula.
Oh my God.
So many of those images.
Yes.
Like, oh my God, this looks and feels so much like that. Even like down to his like really slight smile in those moments. I was like, wait a minute. Okay, I feel so confused. I'm having a lot of feelings right now. My body is responding in an interesting way. What's happening? Oh, okay, good. It's over. We're back to it. Oh my God.
I think it's good to note that as we started this project, it was because Kelly Sue and Philip hadn't seen these episodes. And so our audience just needs to understand that when we gave them the homework of like, go watch these shows, Kelly Sue first did it. And the POPSKL group text messaging feed was a wonderful place where both Kelly Sue and then Phil both came at the same moment, and you knew we all knew what moment it was in this first episode. They're no, don't eat the breakfast, don't eat the sausage, don't eat the sausage. Oh my God, no.
Oh God. And yeah, like I've said it before, I'll say it again, like officially here. I spent the first season watching this show being extremely stressed out about what people were eating.
Oh God,
like, and keeping very close track of who has eaten people at this point and who hasn't eaten people. And I was like right off the bat in the first episode, Will's eating people. And I was like, fuck.
Even though
too late, you're no longer pure, Will.
We all know Hannibal Lecter is a cannibal going into this. Yeah. And yet I'm still sitting there being like, they're eating people?
But you don't think about, even having read the books, it's one thing to maybe read about it, another thing to see it. It's sure, you know, Hannibal eats people, but you don't really connect that to Hannibal feeding people to other people. That's a whole horse of a different color. Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's like he's bringing all these otherwise innocent people in on the crime. You know, like he's making them somehow complicit, which makes the evil even more sinister. You know, it's just,
and that's what I love so much about this version of Hannibal that we're seeing, is that it's like we're seeing that it's like he wants to shape the world. He wants to shape the world to the way he sees it. He doesn't see himself as an outlier. He sees everybody else in the world as outliers.
He sees himself almost as a trailblazer. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, that's what continues to be so fucking fascinating about the way this character is portrayed in this show.
Well, and
Phil, we haven't heard from you about the visual aspects at all. Not a peep.
Yes.
You know, this show has a lot. When this show came out, there were about a million procedurals out there. All had a genius person that could solve crimes or could figure out, you know, what the disease was that was killing someone, you know, with house or whatever. So I mean, this was like, I mean, these are pretty common tropes in network TV, right?
Mhm.
And I'm sure Bryan Fuller was like, I don't want to do it exactly the same way. I
Mhm.
don't want to just do another procedural and get lost in the shuffle. And what I see happening with the show almost immediately is we are presented with people's mindscapes. Like we are put into people's heads with the way things are lit, with how they're shot, with the sound. Like when we are in Hannibal's office, we are in Hannibal's mind. And there's a very different feel from Hannibal's mind than when there is with Will, who's on a crime scene, you know, which is doused in red and is, you know, everything moves backwards in a very strange way as he kind of sees things through. And immediately, like right away in the show, you're given like a visual motif that, you know, with, you know, we always see brilliant people on crime scenes in TV shows. We don't see it like this. We don't see him falling into his imagination. We don't see him, we don't see a person like kind of rewinding elements in their head and then walking through it themselves and sort of that step-by-step pattern as he kind of figures out how all these elements happen. So I think it's really nice, really such a nice angle to kind of take the show at, to create those kind of mental scapes, so that we're presented not only with a story, but also kind of the landscape of everybody's heads. I really appreciate that about this show so far.
Yeah,
I
that,
can't.
in that first scene, like the very first scene where we're seeing the very first crime scene,
Mhm.
and we're seeing for the first time how Will sees.
Mhm.
I love how it's, I mean, yes, you get the kind of swipe
Mhm.
thing, and then the color just pops. It's like
Yeah.
super golden colored,
Mhm.
and then when he kind of has to snap out of it in the middle to like ask for the records of the security company, it goes back to like this kind of desaturated,
Mhm.
regular, what we're used to seeing in a procedural
Mhm.
lighting.
I
And it's
can't.
like even just that is just such a instant from the very first scene, like, oh, we're doing something very different here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to give credit to, I don't know what YouTuber it was, but somebody, because I've watched so many different analyses of this show, because it, in some ways I just need a professional, you know, like cinematographer walking me through everything that they're doing. It's that complex and that well thought out. But even in those shots, Lisa, like you're saying it, yes, when we see that when when Will's in his imagination, it is a homier place. He feels at home when he's in those moments.
Mhm.
And the camera angle changes as well. So when we're with Will at the crime scene, he's, you know, kind of in the background and away from us. And then as soon as he moves into his interior, you know, analysis of the scene, we get full close-ups of his face, which also helps, you know, us to feel that like separation and social, you know, discomfort that he feels in a room full of people. He's never part of the room of people. He's always separate from them. It's just fascinating, everything that they do with it.
There's also, you know, it's no accident that, I mean, this show maybe feels the most like a Bryan Fuller show out of anything that I've seen of his, in that, this is a guy who comes from science fiction and fantasy. So he portrays this extreme empathy of Will's almost as a superpower, you know, right down to, like you said, you know, changing the color palette, making it these warm sepia tones as opposed to, you know, the more sterile lighting of reality. But he's also very much a TV guy, and not so much like, and this is you know, as we said already, this is about network television. This was on NBC, and so he makes freaking genius use. They make genius use of the commercial cuts. You know, I mean, Will says in the autopsy room he's eating them. You know, after they go through the whole lung cancer thing and they realize he's eating them. Cut immediately to a brief shot of Hannibal eating dinner, go to commercial. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's our first time seeing Hannibal, you know? And it's like, you go and do commercials with that on your mind, with that like, holy shit, you know what I mean? Like, come back, you know?
You're not going to go grab a snack during that commercial break.
No, you know, like you may have to pee though, because, you know. Then Hannibal said, later on in the episode, Hannibal says to Jack, this cannibal you have him getting to know, I think I can help Goodwill see his face. Cut to commercial. As soon as we come back, the very next thing we see is the body on the antlers outside that Hannibal himself set up, you know, and it's amazingly cool. You know what I mean? It's so genius. And it's a part of the design aesthetic, you know, like the format, the way it's written is a part of that design aesthetic. And just to comment on what Phil was saying about the mindscapes, on a certain level, it's important that this show is called Hannibal, because on a certain level, certain choices are always reflective of Hannibal. Insofar as this show, no matter what it does, even when showing brutal murder scenes, this show is unrelentingly elegant.
Yes.
The splash of blood occurring on a wall looks like art. It does not look like murder. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
And Hannibal, brutal murderer that he is unrelentingly elegant. And I think that's, you know, that through line carries through every mindscape, every visual, every, you know, I think it's all about making this show in that respect is about Hannibal, even when he's not there.
Well, yeah, because I think for the most part, Will sees that elegance. So when he's walking through it. Yeah.
It's why we have a segment called Exquisite Corpse. Which we will get to after the break. Welcome back. Let's keep talking. So one of the things that I found really interesting about this first episode and setting up Will and Hannibal was like really focusing in on like, you know, it's talked about how Will is so empathic that it's pretty much a disorder. And you know, we're talking about psychopaths, which Hannibal Lecter obviously is. And so I kind of wanted to talk more about this kind of empathy versus psychopathy thing. Because, you know, we talk about how they're opposites all the time, but are they really? Especially in the context of this show, like, you know, how is it showing how empathy and psychopathy are actually like related to each other? So does anybody feel like that's meaty enough to dive into? I'm intentionally doing all these puns, by the way.
It totally is. I think that talking about opposites in this way, especially in this relationship with Will and Hannibal, the paradoxical nature of opposites is that they inherently are the same thing, just two different sides of it. So these two are the same, but in opposite ways, right? So I think that this is why yes, they do, obviously they meet each other for the first time in this episode. I think this is why there is that spark in that scene when they both first meet each other, where it's this recognition of like, you're my other thing.
Yeah.
You have what I want and vice versa, right? Because Will is constantly talking about how this pure empathy is such a specter for him, you know? And Hannibal needs more of it. You know, he
Yeah.
longs for more of it. And I think that obviously, like, if we want to get really into Hannibal Lecter, that is one of the reasons why he wants to ingest people, you know, to be a person.
Mhm.
And so I find these two things so, this polarity specifically, so fascinating.
Yeah.
And I also related so much with Will Graham's experience of empathy that I actually ended up talking to my own therapist about it. And I was like, is this really a thing? And she was like, I've been meaning to talk to you about this.
Mhm.
She's like, there's a few things that I want you to look up and do some reading
Just
on. And I was like, oh
appreciating-
my God, this is wild. Because I so
I-
related with that character in that way.
Yes. I 100% feel the same exact way as far as like relating to Will on the empath level, because
Yeah.
it's like this is something that I have to a degree as well.
Mhm.
Where, and it's like when we talk about like, you know, when we talk about empaths, not in the world of Hannibal, but in the real world, it's like it's this like, yes, you can read the room,
Yeah,
and it's almost overwhelming
100%.
because you know, you can sense what everyone is feeling,
Mhm.
and you feel like you need to kind of shape yourself to fit in.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it gets really confusing. The
Mhm.
boundaries come down,
Mhm.
and it's really, really hard to kind of remember who you are,
Yeah.
like who I am.
Yeah.
When I'm having like major empath moments,
Uh-huh.
it's like, wait, what is it that I want though? I
Yeah.
can't remember because I'm so consumed with what everybody else wants.
Yes.
And so I am relating to you, Kelly Sue.
Yes. But
And
interestingly,
it's also a reason I really relate to Will Graham too.
Yes.
Not that I can like recreate murders or anything, but that
Yes.
concept, I'm like, I understand.
yes.
And I think that it's also that kind of like breaking down of like kind of personal boundaries, that it's like because it's so easy for him to like fall into like the viewpoint of a murderer, it's so easy for him to fall into Hannibal,
Mhm.
and for their relationship to kind of like grow from there, that they find I mean, that it's like, yes, Hannibal finds Will fascinating,
Yeah.
and Will just can't help himself around Hannibal.
Yep.
I just
So.
want to bring a moment of appreciation for both Kelly Sue and her therapist, just in thinking of that moment when Kelly Sue said, so I really identify with the characters in this show, Hannibal, and we
Yeah.
need to talk about that.
It's true. Because what I said next was like, I really feel this pure empathy thing, but what is ultimately really freaking me out is that I also really identify with Hannibal's levels of curiosity about his surroundings and about other people. And I was like, I really feel this is the crux of my problem. That I'm so empathic and I'm constantly feeling other people's things. Like, I don't like to call myself an empath because I don't. I think everybody is an empath, really. But this deep experience of empathy that I have mixed with an inability to control my own curiosity about other people has gotten me into a lot of trouble.
You didn't bring snacks to that session, did you? I hope, like
Oh
a
my
little.
God.
Little jerky.
Yeah, and her reaction was lovely, and I adore her very much. But yeah, this, when you wrote this in here, Lisa, I was like, oh man.
She and I have spent a lot of time talking about this question. Does anybody else have any like thing that they want to say about it?
I know that I don't think of empathy and psychopathy as opposites necessarily. I think it's because I see, you know, I guess I see them. I'll speak to my own experience a little bit, just only in that I'm very comfortable in social settings. I'm very comfortable in my own skin, and I'm very comfortable having other people outside my skin, you know. And
I'm glad you're not very comfortable having other people inside your skin. I mean, just like the other, yeah. That was a visual. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. Now I can see hands sticking out of me. I've often felt like I'm good at connecting with people and getting to the root of their feelings. I think it's what made me a successful bartender. Like, you know, knowing how to read a person quickly, you know. And I guess I've always thought it in more clinical terms, that I was, you know, unconsciously analyzing as opposed to empathizing, if that makes sense, you know. But I'm also like, when I read a room and I feel like the room has a certain vibe, I have a tendency sometimes to decide I'm going to take control of the vibe now, and I'm going to manipulate the you know, the emotional read of this space to something that I want it to be. You know what I mean? Which, when I say it like that, you know, it sounds a little psychopathish to me. You know what I'm saying? Sounds a little bit like, I don't care what you're feeling. You're going to feel what I want you to feel. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's, I don't know. I do feel a sort of hand-in-handedness as opposed to opposition there, you know?
Claire, Phil, anything you want to add?
I think I would just add that I find it really interesting that right up front in the episode, Will acknowledges that, or, you know, or that the show acknowledges that Will is presenting as if he's on an autism spectrum. I'm interested because I've heard other people describe that as not so much being a spectrum. So we feel this dichotomy because I think we think of it as this two-dimensional, you know, movement from one thing to the other. You're empathetic or you're a psychopath. And I've heard other people describe autism or Asperger's or those kind of things as not necessarily being a spectrum where you fall along this two-dimensional line, but that it is a layering of different neural variances. I don't want to call them disorders, right? But just like and so there's this layering of things that it makes trying to think about somebody, you know, we're inclined to want to think of Will as being an empath, and that's the label we put on it, and it's the one thing we're thinking about. The same thing for Hannibal and being a psychopath. And I think the show goes a pretty long way to give us those layers of, you know, various things. And I don't even know what to label all of them, but clearly, you know, Will has other things going on, and Hannibal is a more complex character than just this cold, I don't like using a lot of the words that people, I think, usually describe a psychopath with because I think it reduces things down to that just, you know, two-dimensional look at a character. And I don't want to talk too much about it for those for Philip in particular. But I think as we move on through the season and the seasons to come, that we start to understand that there's so much more going on than just this linear look at one thing or the other. And that's what's fascinating to me, that two, and again, it comes down to the word paradox that Kelly Sue was using. It's all about recognizing that two seemingly conflicting things can be going on at the same time in one person's head. And that is so much more representative of the real world and the way, at least I feel like my brain works. I'm not a psychopath I don't know if I'm an empath or not, but I'm pretty sure I'm not a psychopath. So it's fascinating, and it is I can attribute it to really good writing And I think a really good understanding of the characters by Hugh Dancy and Mads Mikkelsen. I think they really get that as well.
Yep.
I'll add real quick that I think it's very important that the scene in which Will says that he's never seen a psychopath like this, how that's, I think that's a very important scene, is setting up how this show is going to differ from other shows and how the same sort of psychopathy that we've seen in other shows won't exist here. How that's going to play out, I'm very curious to find out. But also, I do understand, the way I relate to Will is I certainly understand how an overactive imagination can be many times more harmful than helpful, especially when dealing with social anxieties. That's where I immediately connected with Will. But I think for now, that's kind of all I have to add to that conversation.
All right. Well, we got like 38 more.
Yeah,
times
39
to talk
episodes.
about it,
Yes,
so.
exactly.
So much coming,
yeah.
Phil.
So
much coming.
We have arrived at the Exquisite Corpse segment. Claire, tell us all about this week's Field Kabuki.
Yes. So every episode, because we're never going to get away from these visuals that we are treated to in Hannibal, we are going to do a segment called Exquisite Corpse, in which we, and I really want some good puns, like Lisa and Kelly Sue were the puns here. I don't know. We're just going to go head first into the crime scene visuals that are presented for us. And in Apéritif, this first episode, we obviously have the set piece of Cassie Boyle's body discovered in this field, impaled on a stag's head on the antlers, and in this just very dramatic, artistic scene. And what we want to look at, what we want to explore in this segment is really the symbolism and the story and the meaning that we can take from these scenes. I don't think the show intends just, to gratuitously, hand us these artistically beautiful, grotesque scenes just for the sake of doing something shocking. They always have meaning in this show. So obviously the imagery of stags and symbolism around hunting and field dressing and displaying, dead creatures has a lot of importance in this episode. So I'm interested to hear everybody's, what you take away from this scene, what you thought of it, and what you think the meanings are behind, this imagery of the stag and the antlers.
The first thing that, because this actually really was something that struck me when I first watched this episode, was how much they were right off the bat from the very beginning showing us that these serial killers are more than just villains. That whoever is doing this is a person, has a life, and that there is a level of humanity underneath these acts. That it isn't just, I'm taken over by some supernatural devil. You know what I mean? There is a little bit of that, but all of the hunting and the using all of what you kill as being a virtue of hunting, all of that, it was like there's a person behind all of this. And to set it up in this way at the very beginning with something as sort of primal as hunting, that's what the antlers said to me, and this whole profile of the Minnesota Shrike and the care that went into these victims and setting up the field kabuki and all of that. Instantly, it's like, this is more than just, you're a bad guy. And I really appreciated that.
Lisa, I'll go to you.
So, when I think symbolically of, stags, antlers, they're generally like symbolic of virility. and masculinity and dominance, really. And it's like, I feel like that is all, you know, very much coming through, since we know that this is a Hannibal kill and not, you know, a Garrett Jacob Hobbs kill. That, and Will is talking about how it's not honoring the victim. It is an act of dominance over the victim. It is this act of superiority over the victim. And it's just so cavalier that it's like what Hannibal said. It was the gift he was giving Will so that he could see who the real killer is of the 8 other girls. And I don't know, it just the way Cassie Boyle's body is laid out is also, I mean, I don't know what to say about this, but I was definitely pinged about, it looks like La Pieta, like the way she's draped over them, or over the antlers. And so I don't know what to say about the Jesus symbolic or symbolism of that pose, but that's definitely like, I saw that in the pose. So yeah. And then of course, you've got the murder of crows, the carrion birds that are all like flying around and everything. And so yeah, there's a lot going on in this first kind of like murder display.
Yeah, I love that the imagery of the stag gets mixed in with the crows, ravens. A lot of people call this thing that Will sees the raven stag. Which is a gorgeous name. That's the one I prefer.
Yeah,
I love that it's this visualization, like Philip was talking about, getting to be in the mind, Will's mindscape. This is how we are, and how he is experiencing part of his mind that he doesn't know is working, and has, is connecting things that he cannot overtly acknowledge yet. Like he's somewhere deep in him, he is sensing and understanding that there is something bigger and more significant, like the biggest thing he's ever had to hunt, the most intimidating and beautiful at the same time. You look at the way the stag appears to him. Sometimes it's something that he's confronting head on. Sometimes it's something that's just kind of that he sees in the background of a scene, and that he doesn't even really understand why it would be there. It's a fascinating imagery.
I do think it's interesting that you Lisa, you mentioned kind of a masculine sort of field, because the first thing I think about is Artemis when I think of stags, and that's very feminine and very, the moon and the wilderness, a very feminine sort of pastiche, kind of pastiche all this. But it's interesting because the death early on, when she's laid in the bed, it's very different from the death, the field kabuki. We're already presented with a sort of antler composition in the bed frame, kind of coming off her head. We see the antlers on the bed frame. So early on, we're getting those sort of visual cues of, like you mentioned, the composition of the body being draped. And these are very much kind of, I think maybe in Hannibal's eyes, noble sacrifices. Like this girl's being sacrificed so that I can further Will's kind of understanding of what's happening, or that there is kind of a sacrificial element to this, or whatever might be happening. But I do think there is kind of that sort of element of sacrifice happening, like a forced attrition, almost like a forced sacrifice, obviously. But one other thing I'd like to point out about the field kabuki scene is we don't see that scene through Will's mindscape. It is not, he doesn't have to go, or maybe he doesn't want to go that deeply into this. It's not, he's not seeing things, he doesn't need to see things in reverse. He doesn't need to see how this is set up. He just knows that he's being like toyed with and that kind of spitting in his face. It's almost shot more like a scene from Seven than it is that sort of kind of elegant backwards, getting into Will's head. You've got kind of the camera angles, the harsh light kind of behind Will's head, that sort of gold and very dark kind of contrast with lighting. It's like it's meant to be a little more, and the handheld camera as well. Like this is more discombobulated. Even the music is very dissonant in this scene, which is very different from when we see into Will's head earlier on when he's kind of walking through the first murder scene at the house. It's we're presented with a very different kind of landscape for Will, like when he doesn't either know exactly how to put things together or he doesn't want to step into that space. So I think it's there's a lot going on there with that, how that's presented and everything.
I think my take on this sort of straddles the line between what Phil just said and what Lisa was saying earlier. I too, when I think of antlers, I think of a certain masculine, powerful energy. And I think, I feel like, but I also, like Will, think that it's important to view this scene juxtaposed with the death of Elise Nichols earlier. Because both were gored, both were gored by the antlers, but it's important that Elise Nichols was then dressed again. She was taken off the antlers. She was put in a personal private space. Whereas, what's her name? Cassie Boyle is laid out for the world to see, naked, and left on the antlers. And so there definitely is, opposition between the two tableaus, so to speak. I had not even realized or noticed that Will doesn't seem to turn on his powers, so to speak, with the field kabuki. I think it's a good observation. But I think more than anything else, and this might be contextual for me, I might be seeing it in the context of the show as opposed to the episode. I think this is a foundation stone. This is the first murder we see Hannibal commit, and I think the fact that it speaks that the symbolism of the certain, masculine power there, I think is something that we will return to. And, as soon as the next episode, and kind of reveal something of why being a killer of men and women, killer of humans, is attractive. I think that this is saying something about Hannibal and why Hannibal does what he does. And not just, from a sense of I've killed this person to present a negative so that Will can identify a positive, which is, the one thing. It's also, it speaks to how cavalierly Hannibal views the lives of others. This person's life is best used to expand Will's horizons. And I think, the dialogue is very explicit here. This killer thought this person was a pig, which is the crux of how Hannibal chooses people to kill,
I think I read somewhere, Justin, that they initially had filmed a scene with a living Cassie Boyle in conversation with Hannibal, and how she was apparently this like rude teenager who doesn't want to be in therapy. And so she's smoking a cigarette and blows smoke in his face. So there is I think the intention originally was that there would be this depiction of the rudeness that triggers his selection of her. and then that they were going to use the fact that she had smoker's lungs as part of the food preparation part of that. And then they decided to back away from it because it was maybe too much. I can't remember all of those reasons. It's interesting, you know, this. I know, right?
I love that, and I love that they had the idea for it, but I also love that they didn't do it.
I do too.
They didn't.
Yeah.
I think the seeming at this point randomness of the selection, you know, I think lends to that, you know, the unimportance of other lives to Hannibal. You know?
Right. Yeah, it would have been too much too soon. I'm really fascinated by this conversation that we're suddenly having about masculine versus feminine. And because I think it goes back to, I don't remember, I apologize. It was either Kelly Sue or Lisa talking about how the show does a very good job of presenting the killers, the psychopaths. And I'm thinking very much of Garrett Jacob Hobbs here as real people with complex issues that they're dealing with and they're just not, they're not just these murder, evil murder people. Boy, that was weird, but okay. Anyway, you get what I'm saying.
They're not just stock villains.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we can stick with evil murder people.
Yeah, evil murder
I'm
people.
Into that.
Yeah.
I'm into that. Yeah.
Because I think we feel that being mirrored in Will in his emotional reactions when he sees Cassie Boyle's body in the field. He reacts the way Garrett Jacob Hobbs. He's already identifying with and behaving the way Hobbs would react to that scene and feeling offended that this girl's body has been treated the way that it has been treated. And so we see already how Hannibal is starting to groom Will into identifying with and thinking the way, you know, extending his imagination about the inner life of this murderer. He's already doing that. There is and when you compare Hannibal's actions with Garrett Jacob Hobbs, there is, I think, a kind of a masculine to feminine, you know, paradox going on there as well, because Garrett Jacob Hobbs never feels like a aggressive masculine, you know, like toxic masculinity hunter guy. There's a interesting dichotomy there too, where he's a hunter, but he feels very in his physique even doesn't fit to me that mental image of the I own a lot of guns and I go hunting kind of, you know, stereotype. He feels very emotional and softer than that, I guess.
Well, we're given to understand in the course of this episode also like that this is a guy who loves his daughter, you know, like he elevates, you know, his daughter, and she's important to him. So yeah, I think that's spot on.
Well, that's Exquisite Corpse. We're going to have so many more of these to dissect. I got the pun in. I did it. Woo!
Thanks, Claire. All right. Moving on to the recommendations section of Murder Husbands. For this particular episode, Apéritif, I am going to hand it over to Philip to give us a recommendation of, if you liked this episode of Hannibal, what else might you like? Phil, take it away.
Yeah, so immediately, the moment Will meets Hannibal and they start already kind of playing that sort of cat and mouse game, I was reminded of Death Note, the anime. It is remarkable. There is a like 3 to 5 episode sequence that had me gripping my chair and my stomach churning, because it is all a cat and mouse game. It's there's someone who's slowly realizing that they're a sociopath and they're given the power that you don't want a sociopath to have. And there, on the other hand, is an absolutely eccentric genius crime solver. So you have kind of a similar dichotomy going on once all the story is set up. But yeah, there's a specific series of events between our sociopath and a certain woman that is probably one of the most intense things I've ever watched. And there are, and it's only conversation. Like that's all that happens is conversation over a series of episodes. And so, like watching this episode, I was immediately reminded of Death Note, the anime, which I highly recommend.
Oh man, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I haven't watched Death Note in a while, but god damn it, that's spot on.
I haven't
I've
finished
never
it.
seen Death Note. My brother's been trying to get me to watch it forever.
Yeah, I haven't finished it. I've only made it like a certain, far, distance into it, but I want to get back to it.
I feel like my son has watched this and talked to me about it a lot. And when I say talk to me about it, is I'm not necessarily that much into anime. And I recognize that I should be probably more, but my brain does not quite get it yet. So, but my son likes to talk at me about anime all the time. I feel like this is one of those things where he was like, Mom, you've got to hear this.
It's pretty remarkable what they do in this
Sure.
in this anime. Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the classics of the genre. It's
High marks.
it's real good, y'all.
yeah, it is. Yeah. And I guess that ends the recommendation section for this episode.
I love it.
Hold on.
All right. Well, then
Really
it's
good.
time for us to sign off. But first, I am going to go around to let everybody know where the people listening can find you outside of this podcast. Let's start with Kelly Sue.
Ooh, yay. You can find me on the Instagram at Kelly Sue Says, and also on Twitter at Kelly Sue Says, and follow me because maybe that'll give me some impetus to actually tweet. You can also follow me and my single video on TikTok at Kelly Sue Says as well.
Awesome. Justin.
I post a page of my hardboiled webcomic Hunter Black every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at hunterblackcomics.com. You can find me on Twitter at hunterblackcomx because I ran out of characters. Yeah. JustinPeniston.com, I guess.
Sounds good. Claire.
I am at Unexpected Hobby on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My Etsy store where you find all my geeky cross-stitch patterns is Unexpected Hobby as well. And you can find my book, A Geek's Guide to Cross-Stitch Journeys in Space, on the Fanbase Press website.
Awesome. Philip.
I am at Philip Creates across all social media.
Nice and simple. You can find me at LCatWeber on all the social medias. And you can find Hex 11, the book that Kelly Sue and I make together, at hexcomics.com. And
It's the
that
bomb,
is
by the
our
way.
Oh, thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Justin.
Saying.
And that wraps up our first episode of Murder Husbands. You can give us a follow at POPSKL Pod on all of the social media channels. Give us a subscribe and a follow. We would really appreciate that. That is POPSKL POD. You can also listen to other things we have talked about. We've talked about The Expanse, we've talked about Sandman, and we did those with the Fanbase Press, and you can find episodes of those shows on Fanbase Weekly. We'll see you next time to talk about mushroom people. And until then, happy hunting. This has been a Popsicle Podcast production.